In 1944, as Europe burned and the Third Reich began to collapse, a small group of German engineers was still dreaming about the future. Not a future of surrender, but a future where technology could rewrite defeat. Deep within the pine forests of northern Germany, on an island called Usedom, stood a facility unlike anything else on Earth, Peenemünde. It was a hidden fortress of science. Barracks, hangars, laboratories, and underground tunnels stretched across the Baltic coast, guarded by barbed wire and silence. Every day, thousands of workers, scientists, and forced laborers entered through its gates. Few understood what was happening behind them. Inside, a young engineer named Werner von Braun was building something the world had never seen before. Machines that could break free of Earth's grip. Rockets capable of traveling faster and higher than any aircraft ever built. He wasn't just designing weapons. He was building the future. By the age of 32, von Braun had already become one of Hitler's most valuable scientists. His creation, the Aggregate 4, or A4, would become infamous under another name, the V-2 rocket. It was the first man-made object to reach space, climbing more than 100 kilometers before crashing down at supersonic speed. In 1944 alone, more than 3,000 V-2 rockets were launched against London and Antwerp, killing over 9,000 civilians. The technology was revolutionary. The purpose was monstrous. For the Nazi leadership, the V-2 was a weapon of terror. For von Braun, it was proof that space travel was possible. And for the SS, it was a last chance to change the course of a losing war. But even as Germany crumbled, Peenemünde was planning something bigger, something that could strike not just Britain, but America. A two-stage rocket powerful enough to cross the Atlantic Ocean and hit New York City. Its name was Project A9/A10. The concept was unlike anything the world had seen. The A10 would be a massive booster stage, a 20-meter-tall monster burning liquid oxygen and alcohol, producing thrust far greater than any engine then known. On top of it sat the A9, a smaller rocket with wings, capable of gliding through the atmosphere and guiding itself to its target. Together they formed the America Rocket, the America Rocket, the first true intercontinental ballistic missile in history. The plan was simple, at least on paper. The A-10 would launch vertically, carrying the A-9 to an altitude of more than 300 kilometers, almost into orbit. Then the stages would separate. The A-9 would re-enter the atmosphere, level out, and glide across the ocean toward the eastern coast of the United States. Flight time, less than 40 minutes. No plane in existence could intercept it. No radar could track it, and no city could defend against it. For the Nazi high command, the thought of striking America was both symbolic and strategic. They wanted to break morale, to show that even with the war lost, the Reich could still reach across oceans and strike its enemies. Hitler imagined newspapers in New York announcing destruction from the sky. It would be his revenge for Germany's defeat. But behind the propaganda, the engineers faced impossible challenges. The A-10's engines would need to produce over 200 tons of thrust, far beyond what Peenemunde's test stands could handle. Its guidance system would have to control a missile traveling thousands of kilometers at hypersonic speed, something no one had ever done. And then there was the problem of accuracy. The A-9's wings could help it glide, but at that speed, even a fraction of a degree off course would send it hundreds of kilometers away from its target. In truth, It was a miracle they got the V-2 to hit a city at all. The A9/A10 was decades ahead of its time, but that didn't stop them from trying. In late 1944, von Braun's team built experimental models. They tested smaller engines, improved guidance systems, and aerodynamic designs. For the A9, they planned to test a piloted version with a single man inside, controlling the descent manually, a suicide mission. The pilot would ride the rocket to the edge of space, guide it toward the Atlantic, and die upon impact. Among those rumored to have volunteered was a Luftwaffe officer named Hans Hutter. On January 24, 1945, as Soviet troops approached from the east, Peenemünde conducted one of its final launches. A prototype of the A9 rose into the sky, leaving behind a trail of smoke that could be seen for miles. Observers reported the rocket reaching extreme altitude before disappearing into cloud cover. Moments later, a distant explosion echoed across the sea. No one ever found the wreckage, but for a brief moment, the impossible had almost become real. Weeks later, Peenemünde was abandoned. Von Braun and his engineers fled south, carrying whatever documents they could save. The SS burned what remained. When Soviet troops arrived, they found twisted metal, empty bunkers, and fragments of blueprints, including one labeled A10. Those fragments were enough to shock the world. For the first time, Allied intelligence understood how close the Nazis had come to developing a rocket capable of crossing oceans. They had built the foundation of modern spaceflight, and no one had realized it. After Germany's surrender, both the Americans and the Soviets raced to capture the surviving scientists. The United States launched a secret mission called Operation Paperclip. Its goal, to bring the best German engineers to America, wipe their Nazi past clean, and use their knowledge for the coming Cold War. Werner von Braun was one of them. He and over 100 members of his team surrendered to U.S. troops in Bavaria, carrying boxes of technical data hidden in a mine. Within months, they were working for the U.S. Army at Fort Bliss, Texas. Their first project? Rebuilding the V-2, the same rocket that had terrorized Europe. But America wasn't alone. The Soviet Union captured the remaining scientists, along with the ruins of Peenemünde. They rebuilt the test stands, studied the engines, and developed their own line of missiles, the R-series. By 1957, the R-7 Semyorka, a direct descendant of von Braun's A9/A10 concept, launched the first satellite, Sputnik 1, into orbit. The space race had begun, and its routes led straight back to Nazi Germany. For von Braun, the path from Peenemünde to NASA was both redemption and denial. He always claimed that his goal was space exploration, not warfare. But the truth was darker. The rockets that carried men to the moon were built by the same hands that once built weapons for Hitler. Even the Saturn V, which launched Apollo 11 in 1969, shared its DNA with the A9/A10, multi-stage propulsion, liquid fuel engines, and aerodynamic re-entry. The difference was purpose. The same physics, the same engineering, only the mission had changed. What was once designed to destroy cities now carried the dreams of humanity. But back in 1944, the A9/A10 wasn't a dream. It was a weapon. Had it been completed, the world might have entered the era of intercontinental war decades earlier. The atomic bomb would have found its delivery system long before the Cold War. And New York, the symbol of Allied strength, might have been the first city struck from space. Historians still debate whether the A9/A10 could have worked. The calculations were theoretical. The technology wasn't ready, and Germany lacked the resources to build something that complex in the final months of the war. But what matters is how close they were. Close enough for American engineers to recognize the design and build upon it. Decades later, in dusty archives and forgotten basements, the blueprints of the America Racketer resurfaced. Yellowed pages, covered in ink and grease, labeled with serial numbers and measurements in millimeters. Handwritten notes by von Braun and his team. A 10 lower stage separation, wing load stress, radio guidance correction. These weren't fantasies. They were engineering documents, evidence of a project that had truly existed. One recovered sketch showed the A-10's engine cluster, 6 massive combustion chambers arranged around a central feed line. Another displayed a launch site built into the cliffs near Calais, aimed westward toward the Atlantic. Each page revealed how methodical the Germans had been. Even as the war fell apart around them, they were still designing rockets for missions they would never see. And for von Braun, that persistence wasn't madness. It was vision. He believed humanity's future was among the stars. But in Hitler's Germany, the only way to reach them was through war. After the war, Peenemünde fell silent. The test stands were dismantled, the bunkers sealed. For years, the island was off-limits to civilians, occupied first by the Soviets, then by the East German military. Nature took over. Grass grew over the launch pads, birds nested in the craters. But the ghosts remained. Today, visitors who walk through the ruins can still see the scars. The rusted rail tracks where rockets were transported, the burned-out remains of the control tower, and fragments of concrete launch platforms once aimed at the sky. Standing there, you can almost hear the echoes of engines that once roared with enough force to shake the earth. Those same engines, redesigned and refined, would later lift satellites, astronauts, and space probes into orbit. The dream of spaceflight had survived, but its roots were tangled in darkness. The story of the A9/A10 is more than a tale of a forgotten weapon. It's the story of how ambition can exist on both sides of morality, a reminder that the path to progress is often paved by those who sought power first. Without Peenemünde, there would have been no Apollo missions. Without the V2, there would have been no ICBMs, no satellites, no space stations.